After we arrived at the cabin, there were some odd things that had happened. Like one time we were driving on these winding mountain roads to get to the cabin, and all of a sudden, our car started having trouble. We pulled off on the side of the road and turned the car off and on again, and it started working again. And then another time we were driving back to the cabin, and all of a sudden the headlights went off. And so we started driving in the dark down these winding mountain roads until we finally got to the cabin, and then the lights just started working again. None of this really mattered though, because once we arrived at the cabin, everything seemed fine and we didn't think much more of it. The first day was completely normal. We explored the town of Asheville, had a nice dinner, enjoyed a glass of wine, sat on the porch, and listened to the birds. But that night, around 2 a.m., I woke up to what sounded like footsteps above us. Now the thing is, the cabin was only one floor. There wasn't anywhere for somebody to be walking around up above us. The only way to get to the second floor would have been through a hatch in the ceiling of the living room, which was right above our bedroom, and the hatch was locked. That is what made it so freaky, because if you were to walk around up there, you could definitely hear it through the wooden ceiling. It sounded like heavy footsteps. Not like somebody in a monster truck stomping their feet, but heavy enough to where you could tell someone was definitely up there. I woke Jenna up and she could hear it too. At first, it sounded like the steps were right outside our bedroom, but then they slowly started getting louder, like they were right above our bed. Then they stopped. And of course at this point our minds are running wild. Are we in danger? Is someone trying to break into the cabin? I don't know. I immediately jumped out of bed and looked all around the room. Everything was normal. You could see outside through the window and there was nothing out there. And then we started hearing other noises, like something being dragged across the floor, and voices, but not words, just voices. We still could unsee anything, and we knew whatever was up there was pretty big because you could hear its heavy breathing. So we were lying in bed not knowing what to do next. And we started talking in hushed whispers about what could be up there, and then all of a sudden the lights flickered and died. We were sitting in pitch black listening to this thing breathing heavily, when suddenly the light came back on and everything was normal. No broken furniture, nothing out of place, and no signs of any kind of break-in. I checked the locks and they were all still intact. The only thing that was different was a rocking chair on the porch that was rocking back and forth. And this freaked us out because before we went to sleep, we made sure the porch door was closed and locked. In the morning after, of course, not sleeping at all, we went out on the porch to see if anything was out of the ordinary. And of course, it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, the birds were tweeting, the flowers were blooming, and there was not a single sign of any kind of disturbance. The rocking chair was still rocking slightly, and the cabin seemed normal. We spent the day checking out Asheville, and when we returned to the cabin that night, we decided to stay in and watch a movie. But then the strangest thing happened. We were watching a movie on Netflix and I jokingly said, "I bet there's a secret passageway in this house that leads to another house or something." And then the screen went black. We thought maybe the power had gone out again, but it was still on. And then the TV changed channels by itself. This went on for a few minutes. The TV kept changing channels, and eventually it turned itself off. And then all of the lights in the house flickered and died. We were sitting in pitch black when all of a sudden the front door slowly opened by itself. Of course, we were freaking out at this point, and then the door slammed shut. We immediately ran to the bedroom and locked the door behind us. And then we started hearing footsteps outside the bedroom door, like someone was trying to get in. We huddled together in the corner of the room, scared out of our minds. And then all of a sudden the footsteps stopped. Maybe it was the wind. We didn't want to find out. We stayed in that corner of the bedroom for what felt like hours. But eventually we calmed down and we started whispering to each other about how we needed to get out of there. And then just as suddenly as it began, the power came back on. We looked at each other and smiled and started laughing hysterically. We couldn't believe this was happening. We thought about leaving, but it was late and we didn't feel like driving at night on those winding mountain roads. So we decided to stay another night, and honestly, after the whole ordeal, we didn't even bother getting a refund. The next morning, after of course not sleeping again, we got up and left. As we were packing our stuff, we started hearing footsteps again. It sounded like somebody was walking on the roof. Now we knew it was just animals, but it was still freaky hearing it. But then we started hearing what sounded like people talking in the walls. At first it sounded like hushed whispers, and then it sounded like a full-blown conversation. Now, keep in mind, the walls are very thin and the cabin is very old, so I'm not surprised that we could hear what sounded like people talking. But the voices weren't normal voices. They sounded like voices from another dimension, if that makes sense. They sounded like they were speaking through a long, distorted telephone line. We were so creeped out at this point that we couldn't wait to get out of there. We finished packing, threw our trash away and headed home. When we got back to the city, we felt so relieved to be back in the land of the living. We told our friends and family about everything that happened, and they all thought we were crazy. But I know what I heard and I know what I saw, and nobody can convince me otherwise. Fast forward a year later, and we decided to go back to the cabin, the one-floor cabin in the woods. We figured if we were gonna let this stupid cabin ruin our lives, then we had to go back and conquer our fears. So we booked another weekend trip and we headed back to the cabin. We got there Friday night and spent the day exploring Asheville and having fun. And that night we went out to dinner and came home and watched a movie and drank some wine. All seemed well. Then around 2 a.m. we woke up to what sounded like footsteps again. Now we knew what we were dealing with, so we weren't nearly as scared, but it was still creepy. It sounded like somebody was walking back and forth in the living room directly above our heads, and then it stopped. We waited a while and then we started hearing what sounded like dragging again, but it seemed to be coming from within the walls. We didn't say a word and just listened, and then all of a sudden the lights started flickering. At this point, we knew it was probably a good idea to get out of the cabin, so we started packing up our things and preparing to leave. But then all of a sudden, the front door opened by itself. We were standing in the kitchen and the door was wide open. My girlfriend and I stared at each other and started laughing hysterically. And then we walked out to the porch to check on the rocking chair. Of course, it was rocking back and forth slowly. And then we heard what sounded like a loud voice that said, "Get out." And then the door slammed shut. We no-peed out of there and we haven't been back since. If you ask my girlfriend and best friend if they believe me, they'll say yes. But I think they only say that to keep me happy. I remember watching a show once where they were in an old house and the floorboards creaked, and one of the characters said, "Well, it's an old house. Of course the floorboards are gonna creak, but sometimes it's not the sound itself. It's what it makes you think of. Like maybe your house is haunted." This story comes from a reader. It's about an old house she rented through Airbnb. One night she woke up to the sound of scratching. Let's hand it over to her now. The next morning I was pouring coffee when I noticed something strange. There was a seam in the hallway wall like a door that had been painted over. I looked more closely and there was even a faint scratch mark on the floor like it had been opened recently. Neither me nor my two friends could remember seeing a door there the day before. My friend Troy is curious as hell and went into full explorer mode. He found a flathead screwdriver and pried the wall open. It wasn't a closet. It was a hidden staircase leading down. Brew, I wish we had just shut that door and walked away. Instead, he said, "Come on, let's go check it out." I hesitated, then grabbed my phone, flashlight, and headed down the stairs. Every step was creaky and the air grew colder with each creak. The farther down we went, the smell, oh God, the smell. It smelled like rotted meat and moldy wood. At the bottom, we found a small unfinished room. There was a broken rocking chair, a dirty porcelain doll, and a mattress with leather straps on the sides. Someone had lived down here at some point, or worse, being kept down here. I didn't want to go any further, but my friend Jenna went to the other side of the room and screamed. She found a wall covered in drawings. They were crude, like finger paintings, but terrifying. There were pictures of stick figures of people with black eyes, no mouths, and something written over and over again. "She watches from the dark." I instantly regretted my decision to come down the stairs. I wanted to get out of there, but Jenna was still examining the drawings. She read the writing out loud again. "She watches from the dark." I couldn't help but shiver. Maybe we should leave her to her darkness. As if the whispering darkness had heard me, a voice whispered right behind us, "You shouldn't be here." We all spun around. Nothing. I have to admit, I was scared, so I turned back around to leave. Then I heard it again, louder this time. "You shouldn't be here." This time the voice sounded like a woman. It was raspy and dry, like dead leaves scraping against concrete. We didn't speak. We just stared at the wall, listening for another sound, another word. When we didn't hear anything, we started to make our way back to the stairs. But before I could reach them, the flashlight in my hand flickered once, then twice. I looked down to see that the batteries had both stopped working. Just great. Now we're re-trapped in a creepy underground room with a dead flashlight and a crazed woman who likes to watch from the dark. I tried to keep calm, but it was hard with my friends freaking out behind me. "What do we do?" Jenna asked, her voice shaking. "I don't know," I whispered back. "Let's just find the stairs." We slowly made our way back to where I thought the stairs were. The darkness seemed to press in on us, making it harder to breathe. My phone's flashlight wasn't strong enough to pierce the gloom, but I could make out the vague shapes of walls and furniture. Finally, I felt my fingers brush against something solid. I found them. I breathed, relief flooding through me. As I put my hand on the first step, I heard the voice again. This time, it was closer. It rasped right in my ear. "Leave now." I froze, my blood turning to ice water. Did it know we were leaving? Why wasn't it letting us leave? Slowly, I began to climb the stairs. Every step creaked like a death rattle. I felt something brush against my ankle, cold, like ice cold. I jumped and screamed, scrambling backward. To put my foot back on the stairs, I looked down to see nothing but darkness. "It's okay," I said, my voice shaky. "It's just your imagination." I took a deep breath and started climbing again. Something brushed against my ankle again. I don't want to be too descriptive, but it was like grabbing wet cement. The hair on my arms stood on end as the cold seeped into my skin. I tried to shake it off and keep going. I needed to get out of that room. As I climbed, the voice called out, "Get away." By this point, I wasn't even trying to be quiet. I was desperate to get away from whatever was down there. Finally, I reached the top of the stairs and stumbled forward. I threw myself against the wall, pressing my back flat. "Help," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Guys, hurry up." I could hear the voice coming from below. It was getting closer. "Hurry," I cried. "Please hurry." I pounded on the wall until my knuckles were raw, but it didn't seem to care. My friends finally reached me, their faces pale. Together, we pushed the wall open and scrambled through. We landed in a heap on the floor. "Run," I gasped. We didn't need to be told twice. We ran out of the room, down the hallway and out the front door. We didn't stop running until we were far away from the house. Only when we were out of breath and shivering did we remember that we had and taken our phones with us. Great. Now we didn't have any way to call anyone, or even tell anyone what had happened. We were lost and alone in the middle of nowhere. And to top it all off, it was getting dark. We found a gas station about a mile away and spent the night there. None of us slept though. We sat in the corner, whispering and glancing over our shoulders every few seconds. We were too afraid to be anywhere else. In the morning, we finally convinced ourselves to go home. But the next day, I couldn't stop thinking about that room and that voice. I knew I needed to tell someone, but how would they believe me? No one would believe me. I decided to try contacting the Airbnb host and see if she knew anything about it. But when I typed her name into my phone, I saw that she had deleted her account. I tried calling the number I had used to book the reservation, but it had been disconnected. I was beginning to think that I was losing my mind. What if nobody believed me? Would I always be afraid to go anywhere? I tried to push the thoughts out of my head, but they wouldn't go away. Then I got an idea. If nobody else would believe me, I could prove it. I could show them the pictures I had taken. I dug through my photos and found the ones I had taken of the secret staircase. I showed them to my family and friends. Their reactions ranged from amusement to concern, but none of them believed me. You can't possibly expect us to believe that there's a secret staircase in your parents' basement. Riley, my best friend, laughed. There's no way. I insisted that I wasn't lying, but after a while, I gave up. If they didn't want to believe me, that was their loss. But I knew the truth, and deep down, I knew that there was more to the story than just a creepy voice. Now, I will admit that there is a part of me that is still a little bit afraid to go into my parents' basement. I mean, who wouldn't be after hearing that story? But I also know that my parents would never lie to me, and they definitely don't have a secret staircase in their basement. So I'm starting to think that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I really did lose my mind that night. Or maybe, just maybe, there really is a secret staircase in that basement and nobody believes me because they do want to see the darkness for themselves. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode and want to hear more stories like it, stay tuned for new episodes every week. Also, be sure to check out our website for bonus content, including a podcast, blooper reels, and exclusive merchandise. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.